Hello again. We are back for our latest episode of Boardroom RevOps, where we're bringing you valuable tips from RevOps experts so you can make it to the C-suite. I'm James, co-founder of Account Aim, the RevOps BI platform. Really excited to welcome Charles Wu, the Senior Director of Sales Ops at 6Sense, to the show today. Charles, welcome.
Hey, James. Thank you. Glad to be here.
I'm excited to chat about a topic that I think is fairly near and dear to your heart, and that's nailing annual planning and the importance of it, how to do it, why it's so good for a RevOps career. But first, as always, Charles, do you want to share kind of your quick background for folks just to kind of level set your experience here?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Charles, Senior Director here of Sales Operations here at 6Sense. I've been with the company just about a year now. I've been in a number of RevOps roles over the past 15 years or so in my career. Um, you know, Being close to the revenue and being helped to drive, how does the business operate, how does the business function, and ultimately drive towards the goals is something that's near and dear to my heart. And of course, it all starts in annual planning. So happy to be here and chatting with you on this topic today.
Awesome. Yeah, let's dive in. And I think your command of this process and kind of like the business levers of the places you've worked has been clear to me in our conversation, which is why I'm so excited to have you on. We're going to get into kind of like all the component pieces, but I thought it might be helpful just to get your perspective first on like, why is this so important for someone's career? If they're a RevOps associate, RevOps manager thinking about, getting to senior director, VP, talk to me a little bit about in your experience, like what getting annual planning right or done effectively can really do for someone.
Yeah, I think annual planning is probably one of the more strategic roles that RevOps plays as part of a company's operating motion. Typically, it's where you bring data, you bring strategy, you bring alignment, you bring all the functions together across finance, marketing, product, et cetera. And it's really where the decision and the trajectory of the company gets shaped. And it's also where you really understand what are all the levers that help drive revenue within a company. So even being involved in annual planning, you are forced to understand how the business works, and you're forced to have a perspective, and you're forced to have the data to back it up. RevOps does have a unique role in planning because we sit at often the intersection between all those functions, between marketing, between finance, between the go-to-market teams. So we have not only the data and analytical kind of foundations to be able to validate and justify what goes into the planning process. But we also have the business context, which is so important because ultimately the go-to-market teams are the ones that are driving and executing against the plan. So in that spirit, being able to help develop a plan that a go-to-market team can go actually execute on and go achieve those goals is super critical. Otherwise, planning is just, spreadsheet work. And you're setting yourself up to fail if you don't have a way to go execute on it.
Yeah, so well put. I do think that like this is the best opportunity for RevOps to be like a true business partner to like the executives, and it's just like a almost a great stage to just show really well your command of the business and like everything you're doing day to day that might not be quite as noticeable, when outside of planning. Let's go into kind of like the foundation of annual planning. Like what are the component pieces of doing it well? Like you already mentioned, data, kind of cross-functional alignment, like anything else on that list that like folks should be kind of prepared with, maybe even like before planning.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things to do is get alignment on what kind of year you are planning for. Um, Obviously, companies want to move up and to the right at all times, right? But being able to understand what you can actually realistically achieve in a given year or over a 3 to 5 year period. A lot of planning now extends beyond just the current or the upcoming fiscal year, but rather over a longer time horizon, is around what are the goals you're trying to achieve, right? Some scenarios could be we want a growth at all costs year. I think in SaaS, some of that may be a little bit more in the past than it is in the future, but that's certainly a scenario, right? There could be we are in a build year, in which case we are, looking for generally flat growth, but we are setting up the engine, building the go-to-market motion so that we can accelerate in future years. So depending on the type of scenario, um, you have to get alignment on this with your board, with your executive team, because that drives the investments and the decision making around the components of the plan. For example, if you want a high growth plan, you need to focus on top line bookings, for example. Do you have enough AEs to go support that? Is your TAM big enough to go pursue, additional growth over what you may have done in the past year, right? If you're an early stage company, this is probably easier because your market penetration is a lot lower. But if you've been in the market 10, 15, 20 years, the amount of net new ARR you can grow in any given year is probably a little bit more restricted. So how do you go and activate that? How do you tie the reality of where your market is now, where your org is now, with your growth aspirations? So being able to level set on that also will help bring other functions along, like product and marketing. For example, in that same scenario, if you want to grow and you're an established player in the market, how do you grow net new ARR or ACV without new product releases and new products to sell, to cross sell, to upsell, things like that? So if you can get your teams aligned on what type of objective you want to solve for, that will help figure out what each org is responsible for in order to go support that.
And so are you saying kind of like based on the overarching goal for the company in the upcoming year, it's like it determines where you're going to spend most of your time in planning. Is that a fair kind of encapsulation?
It'll help you figure out where you want to spend your time planning. It'll help you understand where you need to invest, I think, in particular. And then ultimately that'll help tell you how you go and actually execute on whatever targets you set. And I think we'll cover this in a little bit as well, but planning ultimately comes down to some fundamental principles. Like the concept of planning feels very abstract and large, but at the end of the day, you usually have a revenue goal. The revenue goal is made up of two components, right? Like most companies in SaaS, it's ARR, and you want to grow X ARR percent. That's going to require top line bookings less your downsell and churn. And when you break it down into those fundamental components, it's a lot easier to say, okay, how do we continue breaking this down? What are the levers? What are the teams responsible for these? And then ultimately, how do you go and develop a plan that's realistic but also achievable?
Yeah, makes total sense. I think that's great. In terms of data prep, you mentioned a number of kind of data points, metrics already. Like, what's the key data that like you kind of need to run this?
Um, Obviously, when you come into a planning process, you're going to need a strong historical data foundation. So typically, again, when you break down revenue into the components, it's usually top line bookings, and that's typically ACV, historical ACV. If you have different segments or products, ACV by product, by segment, understand your historical headcount, what your headcounts look like, what it's projected to be in the future years. That'll help you ultimately. The other thing I would add is also understanding your TAM and ICP as well. So what is the size of the market you're trying to pursue? What have you penetrated thus far? What do you think? And having a perspective on where you think there's available room to go and pursue. That'll allow you to derive a number of different other metrics like productivity per rep, for example, your average contribution per AE, understanding things like ramp times. So if you have headcount, you have new hires, how long does it take for them to become productive? Understanding different product mixes, splits, new ACV, upsell, etc. That's, I would say, like from a bookings perspective, and in sales, it's usually for those in sales ops, is more top line ACV. That just helps you get a historical foundation of what are the building blocks you have so that you can hit your plan. And the reason why it's important is because at the end of the day, the plan is math, right? If you want to achieve a $1 million number and your average bookings is, 100K per rep or something like that, like it would suggest you need 10 reps to hit that number, right? If you've got 2 reps, the math isn't going to math. So being able to have that at least at the simplest level helps you understand what do you have today, what are the goals you're trying to achieve, and ultimately, if you think about tops down, bottoms up, or however a lot of organizations do it, you have to bridge that gap. And the data gives you the fact, like the actual facts that you can operate with, but also that you can justify investment requests or also, help sort of negotiate that plan as well.
I'm chomping at the bit to ask you more about some of these things because I start to geek out on like the triangulation that has to happen between what you described as like sales productivity per rep versus like available TAM and like book sizes
Hmm.
and things like this as well. So I do want to talk about like how RevOps shows up with finance and the board as it relates to like growth targets and stuff. I imagine you're gonna say, and please do correct me if you're wrong, that like RevOps should be the one that comes with like realistic input on if these things actually make sense based on the assumption. So is that true? And then what I really want to get into, if assuming that is true, and correct me if it's not, is like the specific exercises that like RevOps should be running before like committing to a number.
Yeah. So the first part of the question is, I think, should RevOps, sorry, can you rephrase the
Yeah, the
question?
first part is like, how does RevOps show up with like finance on the board? So like, let's say it's a big growth year, or it's not just like a fundamental rebuild, and the board made a VC is like, oh, we need to grow 5x, and RevOps looks at the numbers and they're like, oh,
Yeah.
oh crap, I don't know how possible that is.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it's really important for RevOps to come and I think to be proactive. I think that's the key thing. Um, Many times companies will plan numbers again in a back room on spreadsheets, right? They're thinking purely about we're at X ARR this year. Next year, our goal is to be plus 10%. It's this is the story we want to tell. This is the number we want to tell the board. And that's typically it, right? And if RevOps doesn't come with a POV without the data to support what we can realistically do, then we are going to get handed a number from some other powers that be that are not justified, maybe do not have the right investment backing, usually comes late, right? Most companies sometimes deliver plans, well into the new fiscal year. So the earlier that RevOps can come in with a proactive point of view, with an understanding of like what's likely to happen, and from a deliverable perspective, be able to produce scenarios, being able to produce all the math that I just talked about of what are the realistic options. And then also not just to say this is unrealistic or realistic, but as you present the scenarios, what does it take for those scenarios to happen? What are the,
Mm.
the requirements, right? There's always going to be like a stretch goal, a base goal and sort of like a worst case scenario in most planning cycles. And where RevOps can come bring in is the data, the analysis, the context of the business to be able to support each of those. And then also talk about what are the levers required to actually hit each of these plans.
Tell me about the soft skills, or I hate to use the word, or the politics of like
Yeah.
coming with a POV. Because I imagine sometimes this might put RevOps in like I want to say naysayer, but naysayer camp, right? The realistic camp. So like, how do you manage that discussion?
Back in data. I think most executive teams, most boards, and I say the term most because I've also seen the opposite as well. But folks, despite whatever lofty ambitions they may have, are generally logical and are generally able to, understand facts, right? So again, we usually have the data. We are the closest to the data. We have all the context around the data and the performance of the business. So we can really just lay that out there and be able to, I think obviously there's a ability to paint that story and be able to tell the narrative as well. But also like RevOps' job is to spit the unbiased facts, right? Like our job ultimately is to help the business be successful and achieve the goals that the business wants. But we are also, ambassadors of our go-to-market teams as well. And, part of our job is to help support the business objectives and the goals the company wants to have. But my job is to make sure that my go-to-market teams are very, very successful, that they have a plan that they believe that they can hit, and it's something that they can motivate them as well. And usually those numbers are never the same, right? Like the board and the executive team will always have loftier and stretched ambitions than what the go-to-market teams feel like they can do. And that's where RevOps has to, not just say we're going to make the number higher or lower, but we have to be able to help figure out the strategy of how we go execute against, some target that was been given. Whether it's, investment envelope, we need to hire, right? And hiring is obviously dependent on the belief of do you have enough TAM and are you able to
Hmm.
pursue or insert additional headcount and still achieve the same productivity. The worst thing you want to do is, hire more headcount and reduce the output per rep. That's never a good thing, and that's not something your go-to-market teams will appreciate. Um, but yeah, being able to tie that to the reality, tie it with facts, be able to present a compelling story is really, where RevOps has to come in. And, most times teams are amenable to that. It doesn't always move the needle because at some point companies have to build a plan that they can sell to the board.
Yep.
And boards rarely are willing to accept flat or no growth as part of a plan. So typically, most companies will have a growth plan and to some extent. And RevOps will obviously help ground in reality, but also call out where the risks are. And I think those risks are really important because it suggests that if X, Y, and Z activities don't happen, then we can't hit this plan.
Yeah, I think that's really well put. Well, I had an old boss, and it sounds really simple in hindsight, but I always frame things as like, what has to be true to hit X, Y, Z, basically, and then you back into like the scenarios around headcount and productivity and stuff, and then bring in the historical data to say, oh, okay, we actually need 60% greater productivity than we've had the last 3 years.
Yeah.
Feels unlikely, right?
Right. Right. Yeah. And then grounding it into the unit economics, I think really helps as well. Because, saying, hey, we want 20% growth doesn't sound ridiculous, right? Sounds pretty normal, but you ground it in, hey, we've got 30% less headcount than we started last year with, the productivity per rep is X. We can't, unless we hire back to our old capacity, right, and increase productivity by Y, um, every rep is not going to deliver 70% more year over year, right? And if they are, like, how would they do it, right? We don't have a new product launch, blah, 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 right? So that's sort of the be able to position it down to the person level, I think really humanizes, I think, the numbers in a spreadsheet. And I find that to be very powerful in sort of helping support that influencing as well.
Agreed. How I'm curious, I think capacity modeling is fairly straightforward, and I think you've even explained enough so far that it's probably clear for folks listening, around historical productivity. Tell me a little bit more if you can around like the TAM piece of this, because I think it's critical, and I actually don't think it's like the most straightforward thing to review. Like, how tactically have you kind of analyzed like TAM and market opportunity per rep, if you have that kind of top of mind?
Yeah. So there is like an old school way to do it, and there's a newer school way to do it. The old school way is a numbers game, right? You believe that, you're selling, let's say you're selling to manufacturing companies. You believe that there are 5,000 manufacturing companies in the country that are of the size, and typically that's firmographics, right? Revenue, employee size, et cetera, in North America that you can sell into. From there, you subset that into, more of a serviceable addressable market, ones that, sell manufacturing or equipment to B2B, for example. And that we believe is 2,000 accounts out of 5,000. Again, a lot of this is taking a data set, right? Whether it's your CRM, whether it's external data, third-party data, et cetera, being able to kind of isolate that down. Then you sort of get to a more of a serviceable, addressable market, a number that you believe that if we were selling our product today, these companies would have a use case to buy us. Um, Even that alone is a pretty, I would say, significant jump to be able to say, like, what is the total universe out there versus who would actually buy us.
Yeah.
That is, it's not a new concept, but even being able to get that right at least puts your sellers and your field in front of the right people. It's very easy to also put your teams in front of the wrong people if you over-index on, broader targeting than that. From there, it's usually a numbers game, right? What do you think about the capacity per seller? How many accounts can a seller work in a given year? How many accounts do you believe that you have in your serviceable addressable market? If we use the example above, for example, if we believe that there's 2,000 accounts, we believe that we can sell our product to in a given year, and you have, 20 reps, can you support 100 accounts per rep? And if the answer is yes, our reps can easily go through 100 accounts per year, then you have a good sizing for your headcount to your addressable market. If you say that, hey, our reps can handle, you know, 200 accounts per year, right? That might suggest you only need 10 reps instead of 20 reps and vice versa. So being able to calibrate your hiring plan, the size of your go-to-market team against what you believe the market opportunity is going to be the most important thing. And that's the first thing, right? That's purely a capacity perspective. Now you think about what is the actual yield we can get from these accounts. So then that starts to go into like potential of accounts. So
Mm.
this is probably a little bit more new age, because potential is both an art and a science. Um, but around, now let's say it's, you have a prospect base. We believe each account can be worth X dollars, right? There's a mechanical way to do it where you size it based on, historical spend of companies like this, employee count, revenue, things like that. And there's also more sophisticated ways where you can collaborate, you can join a bunch of other third-party data, tech stack. You can look at potentially like things like size of sales and marketing teams, their growth, size of certain divisions within the company, number of locations, things like that, and be able to piece together a more sophisticated model. And then being able to quantify that also gives you a dimension around, not only can each rep support X number of accounts, but each rep should have the market opportunity of Y dollars. And that
Mm-hmm.
dollars, I think, is something that's starting to become more relevant, especially as markets become more penetrated and especially as more of these accounts become your customers. Being able to not only project what potential white space you might have for a prospect base, but also on the customer base. Because ultimately, the number of accounts a rep has doesn't dictate whether they're likely to hit their number or not, but the actual, budget or bookable dollars that you can build against an account is directly going to be able to influence their ability to achieve.
Yeah, I love that. That's so great. And then that ties back to like potential productivity and assumptions around headcount and all this stuff. And it's
Yep.
kind of iterative, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I would say like it sounds like it's complicated. I don't think it's hard to do well. A lot of companies sort of build a lot of this modeling in-house. They, again, join a lot of data. I mean, most companies just go with a fit model as part of their TAM and ICP. And I know, our company, our product does a lot of that as well. Um, Selling where you're historically good at selling is a good strategy, right? It's not a
Yeah.
bad strategy for sure. But there are more sophisticated ways to look into it. Depending on your maturity as a company, depending on, the level of skill you have within the team, like you definitely can get a lot deeper.
Yeah. I think this is great coverage of what annual planning entails, the data you need, how to get smart on this. So let's get into execution piece then. Okay, so the plan is set. Hopefully there's not a bunch of replans throughout the year, but how does RevOps then actually kind of turn it into execution? Like what's RevOps' role in that? How do you think about like a thoughtful rollout?
The way I think about it is like planning, despite how much work goes into what we just talked about, is actually the easy part of this entire process because that is all hypotheticals, that is all modeling, that is all numbers in a spreadsheet, it's data on a PowerPoint. There's no real people involved in here yet, and you haven't done anything. So when I think about like RevOps' role and like just in general as a company, it's not just to obviously help support the planning, it's to actually go drive execution of it. So as a plan is rolled out and as the components of the plan, right, whether it's top line bookings, whether it's, hitting this churn number or kind of improving your customer retention by a certain amount, usually the plan is not going to be a flat line over the previous year. Flat line over the previous year basically means, hey, we're going to do the same thing last year, which means we don't need to change anything because we're just going to carry everything forward. Never have I been a part of a company that just carried the productivity from the past year forward. And
Yeah.
there's always
Why
going to be
plan
growth.
then?
Exactly. So like top line, right? There's, if you break down bookings into its simplest components, it's how many accounts do you have that you can generate pipeline from that you ultimately win, right? So if you think about the levers, it's how many new meetings do you set, how many pipeline dollars are you able to generate, and then how are you able to convert and close them? And each part of that equation has a tactical element to it, right? Like number of new meetings, that's TAM identification. Can we select the right accounts? Do we have like how many headcount do we have in the field to be able to go pursue these accounts, right? Typically, you probably get that part right during planning, ideally. Then it's about how do you generate the pipeline, right? Presumably, every company with a bookings plan will have a pipeline target as well. And part of RevOps' job, alongside marketing usually and sales, is to figure out how do we go achieve this pipeline target. Is it pipeline per rep? Is it pipeline through channels, right? Through marketing. So you build a plan to go actually execute on it to be able to hit like sort of these intermediary things. Then when you have the pipeline, how do you drive win rates, right? And again, typically as part of planning, you all have identified what are the top line like resources you need, headcount, TAM, et cetera, what your pipeline targets are and what your presumed win rates are. Again, most likely those are not going to be the same as last year and they're all going to have some kind of incremental improvement. So RevOps' job is to be basically say, this is where we were, this is where we want to be, this is what has to happen in order for us to go do these things and build the right programs, initiatives, frameworks. Honestly, a lot of it is just measurement frameworks, right? Like we're not the ones on
Mm,
the phone. We're not the ones talking to
yeah.
customers and prospects. So the best thing that we can do is we can build a framework that makes it a lot easier for the field teams to understand what they need to do, give them
Mm,
the right tools that they need to do it, measure frequently against certain intermediary KPIs like, pipe gen per rep, pipe gen by channel, conversion rates, win rates, etc. Reviewing that on a regular basis to understand if that needle is being moved or not. And rarely is it all just going to go up and to the right immediately. So being able to spend time and say, okay, then it's, we've launched these targets, they are not being hit. What needs to happen, right? Sometimes we need to do better enablement. So RevOps typically also includes enablement components as well. Um, you know, we're hiring new people. Are our people that we're bringing in, are they ramping fast enough? Right. So there's all sorts of things that you can get tactical. But ultimately, if what you want to do is be able to tie those back to the high level goals that you're trying to accomplish. What are the KPIs you're trying to hit in order to achieve each of those buckets? So um, and that's across everything. I just use top line as an example. It's the same thing for retention, right? You have a certain amount of renewable dollars in a given year. You want to save as many dollars as possible. What's the best way to get the right framework, the right data in front of your CSMs, your renewal specialists, whatever the role might be, to get them ahead of risk, to be able to help them understand what their customers are doing, to obviously be able to forecast accurately, but also be able to you know get these customers healthy in a good state before they're even in a position to be a churn risk. And then that's where, again, you have the overarching objective. How do you get the right data in front of them, right? How do you get, some of the things we're doing is we're, putting Gainsight in front of our CSMs, but we're also trying to, improve the way we use telemetry to
mm.
understand what our customers are doing, where they're having issues and pain points, and giving that visibility to our CSMs in real time so that they can action it. So, typically, that's a lot of what RevOps teams do today, regardless of the plan or not. But being able to understand, like, there's a reason why we do these things. And the more that we can understand how those reasons tie to specific, you know, goals that the company is trying to
Yeah.
achieve, how it ties to the actual plan, I think is very helpful. And it also creates a little bit more like ownership around like why we're doing the things we're doing.
Yeah, that actually ties to my next question, which was around kind of like buy-in. So I find it hard sometimes, as you mentioned earlier, like, we're doing the planning and the data, but we're not the one actually executing in
Hmm.
many cases. So like, how do you get that buy-in from field teams? And it sounds like you're maybe saying like, we all agree on this number, or we have to hit this number. Here are the things we talked about or identified as like
Yeah.
being gaps, and we're giving you like the tools to hopefully achieve it. Is that the right kind of framework?
It definitely is. I think the core of every single RevOps partnership is credibility and trust, right? Like part of what allows us to help bring the teams along on whatever mission that they've been set to go accomplish is they have the confidence that we are working, with them. We have their best interests in mind. Like one of the things we talk about in RevOps and our team all the time is our job is solely to help our go-to-market teams be successful. We have no other ulterior motives. If our teams are successful, then we're successful.
Yeah.
Sometimes that means we're all chasing a target that is high and is a stretch, and we all understand that. But at the same time, given the way that we partner with them on a daily, weekly basis in between planning, hopefully gives them the understanding that like we're on their side. I think that's
Yeah.
probably the first thing that we want to be able to achieve. Otherwise, we're going to be no different than any other function that's just giving them a number. But like what we want to communicate is like we're in this with you. Right. It's not yours to go solve for alone. We will help you build the frameworks. We will help you build the foundation. Helping like RevOps a lot of times is considered like the architect of the go-to-market engine, right? Within the individual teams, obviously the managers and the management team run those teams with those field sellers and CSMs. But how does it all bridge together between top line to marketing to bookings to renewals, et cetera? RevOps really has a fundamental role in the center of it. And a lot of what we need to do is be able to convey that we're here along the way. We're going to help you build the foundation and structure for this. And we are going to, take part in your successes and your failures as well. And we'll continue iterating, right? Not everything is going to work. Not everything's going to work the first time, but we have to try, and then we can fast follow with things if things don't work out.
That's great. I'm fired up. I think it's a good place to end it. We're right at time here. Charles, thanks so much for coming on. Any final thoughts on annual planning, things I should have asked? I feel like we covered it pretty well, but want to make sure I didn't skip over anything.
Yeah, I'll just say for those listening, annual planning is always it's always a lot in a very short amount of time, and you never feel like you quite have everything figured out, and I think that's okay. I would say the easiest thing to do is like keep it simple, break it down to the fundamental components of the plan, right? We call like the first principles of a plan, or really just breaking it down into what are the major things that need to happen in order to achieve it. Uh, and part of it is just figuring it out along the way as well. Like the best plans, can be written down on paper, and things can change in 1 quarter, 2 quarters, et cetera. So be able to adapt, be able to kind of understand what's happening. Obviously, you have to monitor the progress, but yeah, just kind of be flexible, roll with the punches a little bit, and figure things out along the way.
Love it. Charles, thanks so much for coming on. This was great.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, James.